You think you know Leonardo da Vinci, the genius who painted the Mona Lisa, sketched the helicopter 300 years early, and got called the ultimate Renaissance man. But here's what nobody talks about. The man behind all of that wasn't calm. He wasn't disciplined. He wasn't some serene genius calmly producing masterpieces one after another. He was, by almost every account we have, kind of a mess. And the more you look into how he actually lived, the more you realize something strange. This isn't just a story about talent. This is a story about a brain that was wired completely differently than everyone around him and what that actually cost him. Stick with me, because by the end of this, you're going to look at genius itself differently. Start with the notebook. Da Vinci left behind over 6,000 pages of writing when he died, and almost none of it reads like a normal person's diary. He wrote backward, right to left, mirror script, so the only way to read most of it is to hold it up to a mirror. For centuries, people assumed this was some secret code, that he was hiding his ideas from spies or the church. The real reason is much stranger and much more human. He was left-handed, writing with wet ink, and if you wrote left to right normally, his hand would drag through the letters and smear everything. So he just flipped it. That's it. No conspiracy. Just a guy who found a weird workaround and never stopped using it, even when it made his own notes almost unreadable to anyone else, including later historians. And the notebooks get weirder from there. In between his anatomical studies and his flying machine sketches, you'll find grocery lists, you'll find dirty jokes, you'll find an entire page dedicated to listing out slang words for genitals, sitting right next to detailed diagrams of the human heart. There's no separation in his mind between the serious and the silly. It's all just thought dumped onto paper in whatever order they arrive. Here's where it gets stranger. Da Vinci reportedly used to explain his flying machine designs out loud to his horse, and when the horse nodded, probably just shaking off flies, he took it as a sign of approval and kept going. He filled his gardens with cats, birds, small reptiles, and gave each one a name and the personality he'd invented for them. Neighbors would see him having full, one-sided conversations with a lizard about the mechanics of bird flight. Today, we'd call that eccentric. Back then, people just quietly wondered if the guy was fully there. And this is where modern science steps in, because for the last few years, doctors and neuroscientists have gone back and looked at everything we know about how Da Vinci actually operated. Not the myth, the actual behavior. And multiple studies now suggest he likely had ADHD. Think about that for a second. One of the most celebrated minds in human history may have had a brain that today would get a kid pulled out of class and put on medication. The evidence isn't just speculation either. His mirror writing and inconsistent spelling point toward dyslexia, which frequently overlaps with ADHD. At 65, he suffered a severe stroke on the left side of his brain, and remarkably, his language abilities were barely affected. Researchers say that's only possible if his brain had reverse dominance for language, a wiring pattern found in less than 5% of people. His brain, quite literally, was built differently than almost everyone else's on the planet, and that difference explains something that used to confuse historians. Da Vinci abandoned dozens, maybe hundreds of projects halfway through. Inventions left unfinished, treatises started and never completed, commissions accepted and then quietly walked away. For centuries, this got written off as laziness or arrogance, like he thought he was too good to finish anything. But that's not what modern research suggests. That pattern, jumping from idea to idea and never quite landing, mirrors exactly what clinicians see today in adults with severe attention difficulties. He wasn't lazy. He was, more likely, unable to stop his brain from chasing the next spark. Now here's the part that really flips the story. In 1504, Da Vinci was commissioned to paint a massive battle mural, going head-to-head with his bitter rival, Michelangelo, on the opposite wall of the same building. These two hated each other so much, there are records of them getting into a literal street fight. The city was buzzing, waiting to see who would win, and Da Vinci, instead of using the tested, reliable method every artist used for wall murals, decided to experiment with a new wax-based technique nobody had tried in centuries. It failed spectacularly. The paint melted and dripped down the wall in front of everyone. Michelangelo got called away to Rome. The competition just died. No winner, no finished mural, just an unfinished disaster and a handful of surviving sketches. You'd think a failure like that would humble anyone. It didn't slow him down for long, because here's the thing about a mind like his. The same restlessness that made him abandon projects also made him incapable of accepting the world exactly as it was handed to him. He studied mountains and became convinced centuries before anyone else that the earth had to be far older than religious teaching allowed. He studied fossils and realized they weren't remains of mythical creatures. They were just animals that had died a long time ago. He designed a parachute and a helicopter-like flying machine, and when engineers built modern versions from his actual sketches, they worked. But the anatomy is where it gets almost disturbing. Da Vinci performed dozens of illegal human dissections, cutting open real bodies to understand exactly how muscle pulled on bone, how organs actually function. At the time, official medical schools were still teaching anatomy based on a Greek physician from over 1,000 years earlier, someone whose work was riddled with errors nobody dared question. Professors would read that old text aloud during dissections while an assistant cut open the body, and the professor himself would never even look inside to check if it matched. Da Vinci, working alone, outside the system, in secret, ended up producing anatomical drawings more accurate than actual medical textbooks of his era. Think about that. A guy sketching in mirror writing in his spare time understood the human body better than the licensed doctors of his time. And then there's the Mona Lisa, the most famous painting on Earth. Most people don't realize it was never technically finished. He was commissioned to paint it in the early 1500s, and instead of delivering it, he just kept it, carried it around with him for the rest of his life, making small changes here and there, never satisfied, never calling it done. A masterpiece the entire world reveres, and the man who made it couldn't bring himself to let it go. So think about what all of this actually adds up to. A man who couldn't finish most of what he started, who talked to horses and lizards like they understood him, whose own handwriting was designed almost by accident to be unreadable to everyone else, who blew up his biggest career opportunity by refusing to just use the method that worked, whose brain, according to the researchers studying it centuries later, was likely wired in a way that today gets diagnosed, medicated, and pathologized in a classroom. And yet, that same wiring gave us the Mona Lisa, gave us the Last Supper, gave us anatomical drawings still studied today, and flying machines that predicted the future of human transportation by hundreds of years. The very things that made him difficult, unreliable, impossible to work with, restless, obsessive, unable to sit still with one idea, were the exact same things that made him the most famous mind in human history. We love to imagine genius as clean, focused, disciplined, a person who simply decided to be great and then what? But Da Vinci's actual life tells a messier story. Genius, at least in his case, didn't look like control. It looked like chaos that occasionally, almost accidentally, produced something the entire world would remember for 500 years. So when his final words on his deathbed were reportedly about regret, about feeling like his work never reached the quality it should have, maybe that wasn't modesty. Maybe that's just what it feels like to have a mind that never, ever stopped reaching for something it could never quite catch. He wasn't a disciplined genius. He was a beautiful mess who got lucky enough to be remembered for the mess instead of buried by it. Was Da Vinci actually a genius, or was he just someone who never learned to stop? Drop your take below.